let's have a quick look at where we are in the term. The next hand-in is your texture sheets. So I still did some texturing bits that I recorded for you guys on workflow. There's so many like different workflows and jumping between applications. So I need to still share that with you. So I am stretching out the process a bit because these texture sheets, they don't have to be your final texture sheets either though. But I'm going to make the hand-in next week. Yeah, let me just think. I think I'll make it next week Friday, and then we can still see each other one more time before that. What it basically entails, it's not complicated. It's literally just your textures that you've baked, either from Blender or Substance or using some sort of texture baking tool. So it's your ambient occlusion, your base color, your metallic, and your normal maps. Roughness, if you have, you should. Could be called shininess or metallic, could be called specular, depending on which workflow you're going with. And then normally just like find a way of presenting this. What we're basically looking at the end of the day is, if you remember Sketchfab's way of presenting your model, right? So Sketchfab has an overlay mode where you can see the wireframes and the texture mode, the UVs. Any of these models really. Okay, I assume there's a model there, so I'm just going to click away. All right. This is quite an expensive one. Plus it's, yeah, this, it's fan art. You can't even use it for anything, so it's odd that it's so expensive, to be honest. But okay, while this loads, we also built a visualizer for Unity in previous years. So Jared uploaded a asset showcase repo that you can download. It was still done in the lightweight render pipeline, but it still works. So if you load it into, yeah, I haven't installed the 2020 version yet. I'm very psyched about it. I like new tools and tricks and things like that, and optimization. But essentially what you'll get in this asset showcase is kind of the same thing that Sketchfab will present to you when you're uploading a model. All right, so this has your model inspector where you can go and check, you know, without post-processing, what are the base colors like, what does the actual wireframe look like, that shows if your vertex normals, that shows your UVs, and let me just see if I can. Yeah, okay, cool. So you can also check the textures in here. This is basically what we need to produce now, is the flat version of your texture sheets. Okay, because we want to gauge whether all of these elements, like your wireframe, your UVs, and your textures and everything, is you know, of a standard that we can say, you know what you're doing, you know what these sort of textures mean, what they entail, what they produce, and what they add to your models. And that's essentially what we need to see that you understand with this exercise. So so you do have options when you showcase your model in the end of the day. Next week's hand-in would just be these flat textures, which you can, again, like I said, you can update. I have them open in Photoshop. Normally what you do is you sort of combine them all into one. I'm sure there's a quicker way of doing this, but I'm gonna just copy and paste them all onto my base layer. And then you can add masks for each layer so that it sort of see that selection tool, add a mask, there are surely better ways of doing this as well, or more efficient ways of doing this, but let's see this. Let's make a half a mask. And then you can sort of copy these masks across by holding down Option tool, and you can move the mask without moving the layer, and then you can sort of start revealing what that texture is made out of, what it comprises out of. So it's a nice way of just presenting the different layers. Obviously present the areas that are most relevant to the layer. There's no specular or roughness on that area. And you can't actually, sorry, I'm dragging the wrong layer. You can't actually fit them all. If you can't fit them all on the same sheet, maybe do the ones that you're planning on baking together in any case. So like your specular and your roughness go together, your color and your ambient occlusion go together. Just unlock that one. All right. Because eventually we need to produce the textures that the renderer requires, or the material requires, or in Unity's case the shader requires. Let me just quickly show you this counterpart, the Unity asset showcase. So this uses the standard lit shader. So it works with the metallic workflow. You can switch it out for specular if you bake specular maps, or if you produce specular maps, or whatever your workflow was. You should see, for most part, if you use something like Alchemist or Painter, you should see whatever workflow it's using in the materials, and you can also set them, and you can switch them out, and you can bake the one to the other. So as long as you still have the working files. Update again. Not right now, thank you. By default, I think most of them would be set to I still don't know how this, see. Grab one here. I did import some textures the other day, and I don't know. Remember in the beginning of the year we were looking for a replacement of one of the software applications, or a texture baker, a more universal one. So Substance Alchemist extracts all the maps for you from a base color. If you brought in a base color, you can tell it how to approach that color. Let me just see what's happening here. So it's not a scan. No, now I dipped into something that I'm not going to manage to do again. What's that? Import, export. Guys, I don't. Why is it not? Okay, cool. So it doesn't do it as a layer. If you just import it on top of other things, it doesn't think that it needs to convert it. And then you can use this bitmap to material process to extract the other textures that you need. So if you just painted the color map at first, let's say you used Photoshop or Blender or whatever, you can go, or even you just found a texture of something on Google. You can drag that in here, and then you can start sort of tweaking the way that the surface would have been interpreted in 3D space. So it tries to generate lighting information or spatial information from lighting information. So what you would find is that sometimes something's just a shadow, and then it makes this huge dent in your texture, and that's why you get those sort of delighting tools. And I think you can actually it may have some delighting yeah, I think I saw some delighting there, light removal. So then it attempts to take out any shadows. Now this is a texture, so that it doesn't really have built-in shadows into it, so I couldn't find anything. Here you can set the amount of detail that it needs to generate, or height and scale. Sometimes you want just a very flat, so I think this one's a surface scale. It's doing a lot of height. So I think if you, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, so if you tone down the big parts, you still want a little bit of that information. You don't want it to be super bulgy, right? Unless that's the shape of the object. And by tweaking these settings, you can get a lot of fine detail in your map. You can also go and some more light removal stuff here. You can go and set the roughness and glossiness, and then when you're done, when this texture is actually producing the effect that you'd imagine it would on the object, you can go and export your textures. So this is just saving to a particular folder. You can tell it what format to save, what resolution, and what sort of textures you want. So your base color, your normal map, or do you want it to be called diffuse? I think base color is the default for Unity now. I think they they changed it to be more universal. Yeah, so there's yours. This one's exporting specular. If your workflow is metallic, then you can just switch it to metallic rather. Yeah, export those textures, and then you have a baked, well, you'll have a set of textures that look similar to this. And that's basically all you need to showcase. So to generate those textures isn't really a big deal. It just needs to, they just need to work. And I can sort of tell by looking at the textures themselves whether they are working or not. Because you can, if you see the color map and you know that, okay, cool, that's like the back of the piano, and that's, well, those are the keys and so on and so forth. You can judge by looking at the specular map or the roughness map and the specular what's supposed to be shiny. Okay, so there I can see, all right, so none of the piano keys are actually particularly specular. You can obviously test whether these maps are doing what they're supposed to be doing by either importing them into Blender and then reconnecting all those textures that you've now used or generated. But you'll notice that they don't all fit the shaders perfectly, right? So there are textures that you're going to generate or be able to generate that don't necessarily fit with the shader that you're using. So Blender has this principled BSDF shader, and Unity has its lit shader, or it's got a standard shader as well, but I think the render pipeline is the obvious solution. I'll share this link to the asset showcase with you as well, so you can just import your asset, your model, and your materials. I'll show you a little bit more about materials and setting that up later on. It has some post-processing on it, but essentially what it does is it runs a couple of processes. Once you've added it to the scene, you just add it to be a child of assets, then it will automatically work. The lighting in here is pretty basic. There's just a directional light. And what we gain from this then is similar to what we have in Sketchfab, right? So if we want to see the textures, we can zoom in, zoom out. You can rotate it manually as well, and there's also a wireframe view, and there's a triangle count at the bottom. So I think you can gauge from sort of these tools and everything that we're using that these aspects of the model are important. The UVs, the triangle count, and the renderers all sort of do their own thing. So as long as you have, or as long as you're using the sort of standard texture generation for PBR texturing, it should work in most renderers, whether it's Blender, Unity, or Sketchfab. And where you're generating textures and you don't really know where they're supposed to be going, or the shader doesn't have a slot for it, you need to understand how those textures actually impact each other and where they're generally hosted. So that brings us to something that we also have sort of touched on previously, is texture packing, right? So the fact that the glossiness of this metallic map, like there's no roughness slot, right, or specular slot. I mean shininess or glossiness or roughness. There is a specular slot if you switch to specular. Okay, you'll see that oh, now it's lost the metalness. There'll be a slight difference. You'll see that the maps don't quite fit because you won't get the exact same result, and then you probably set to the wrong mode. Let me see, what was that? What's this one called? So it's the specular. Okay. Right, so the roughness is now missing because if you bump up the specular map, you can see, well, it's shiny everywhere. So that doesn't make sense because it's not meant to be that way, right? We still want areas to be glossy, but not everywhere. So we don't want the same gloss on his hair that we have on his chin and on his, like his cloth. The cloth should be less shiny. So something's not quite, I mean, it does look like there is a little bit more specular there maybe, but there's something not quite right about it. And that's because these maps, they're still separate. So the specular and the roughness are still two different textures, and we only have so many slots in our shader. So we need to go and make sure that that these textures are combined in the right way. So roughness and specular, or I think it's different in every different in every shader basically. So this one refers to roughness, specular and metallic. Unity refers to well, specular and smoothness, okay, which is the opposite of roughness. Some shaders call it shininess or glossiness. So yeah, but it's basically the same thing. The one determines the intensity of the specularity, so whether it's shiny or not, and the other one determines the sharpness of the glass. So if it's glass, then it's really sharp, and if it's sort of a rough brushed metal, then it's really low. But the texture determines that. So if you've managed to get this looking like you know what it should, like this is an old piano, so it doesn't have a lot of shiny components. And another thing is the textures that you're generating from this process aren't necessarily all sort of correct the first time round. You may need to go back into Photoshop and say, okay, well, like in the case where I only had the color map to extract textures from, I may need to go and create like a duplicate of this and actually sort of extract the areas that need to be shiny. Now you can go and do that manually, so you can go and paint that in, and then you can go and try and extract specular again from here, or well, in 3D painting tools like Substance Painter, it generates all of those layers for you, so that's what makes it such a quick process. But sometimes it doesn't understand what it needs to automate and what it needs to extract from where. It doesn't know that that's metal necessarily. It could have just been sort of anything, like gravel or something. So you need to sort of convince or create markers for the other software applications to pick it up. So you can, like I said, you can go and paint that in there and then try and extract it again. Ideally you'd have your UVs laid out over here, so it'd be easy to select that, but those ID maps that we generate are also quite useful for this. So I want to see what this does with an ID map. Automation. I think it's all Yeah, it's just two mesh elements, right? So you have a couple of options when baking this as well. Remember in the past we've looked at baking ambient occlusion and other markers into the objects, and we've done IDs before as well. So I'm just gonna do it onto a texture atlas. See, that just picks it up as one thing, so that's not very useful. What you would need to do then is select polygons and add materials to them so that you have other ways of picking up the IDs. You'll merge the materials into one eventually. There was this neat tool that I found called BatX, which is a batch exporter for FBXs. If you have like your entire scene laid out in Blender instead of Unity, but you still want all the objects to be exported as separate game objects, then you can export it this way, and it also merges all your materials into one material ID. So that's very useful. You can find this is, I think, free. There's a non-responsive browser here somewhere. Okay. Wait, what was I? Oh, the exporter. So it was actually based off the same guy that did the text tool add-on for Blender. Sorry, I'm just trying to track it down now quick. That guy. And he's done some pretty cool stuff. This is that's the add-on that I use. But he's actually done it's called FBX something. Damn it. Okay, yes. I know it exists. Okay, and yeah, I suppose you can also just search for FBX badge or BatX. BatX Blender. Right, so that exports FBXs in bulk. It's sort of useful if you're doing a lot of FBX exporting from, or a lot of assets. Yeah, and this is the guy's portfolio that did text tools. There's the text tool one, but I think the one that he did for the FBX exporter is actually deprecated, which is a pity because it would have been a cool tool to use as well. What's his name? Render HJS. No man, not in. Sorry. No, never mind. I'll share. It's in any case a deprecated link. It's just cool to see what you can automate and extract out of Blender. Right. So have any of you started texturing in any application yet? Okay, have you started sourcing textures? Remember I posted those links on Classroom for downloading textures. So I think I added this one quite late, which is the Substance community share. It's not the official it's not the official page for Substance materials. So this is where people upload stuff for free. You need to pay for it, and it's quite a repository. And even though it is essentially Substance materials, there's, if you download them, you can extract the different textures from them in any case. So the whole texturing process is literally finding layers of textures that make sense on your objects, right? So even if it just kind of appears the same, like we've used elephant skin for cracks in the ground, and you know, sometimes you just end up with weird things that look like other things that you can use as a texture. So be clever when sourcing things, and you'll obviously blend and mix. You can't just slap these textures on your models. But I'll show you how I go about texturing. There's quite a bit of painting and overlays and layering and back and forth between baking stuff. There's some fun ones here as well. So here's one for an eye. So you could just go is it not UV dependent? Is it an actual model? This is an actual model, I think. Oh, and you have to have an account, which I think I do. I should have, but I can't remember what that is now. But yeah, some fun stuff. Yeah, Aiden, did you manage to get your model into Substance? I saw another tool for fixing manifold meshes and that sort of stuff. If I remember someone was having an issue with that. Okay. So if it's literally a carpet on his face. Okay. If you export from Substance, then you also get the same kind of options that you would from Substance Alchemist. with output templates and textures and texture packing in place. So this sort of, what it does is it already knows that your diffuse map and your opacity goes into the same texture. So it packs the opacity map into the alpha channel of the diffuse map. The same for the this is now the preset for Lumberyard. So you can go and check out and also get an idea for how many shaders and different sort of ways of packing your materials. You know, how many options there are, how many shaders there actually, and prerequisites basically for the shader. So you can go for either the Unity or metalness or specular workflow, depending on what you've been working in. I enjoy the specular workflow more than the metal one, just because you can see more clearly what your specular is actually doing. It's a closer, and your color maps are also closer indications of what the actual color of the objects are, where metalness tends to darken everything and add sort of almost a U shift based on the color of the metal parts. So yeah, but it's entirely up to you. The specular workflow has RGB in the in the specular map, whereas the metal workflow only has grayscale, which technically makes it lighter than the specular workflow by 2 channels. So that's why I think a lot of software applications default to it. But like I said, for the human eye, distinguishing between the actual colors of your object and the material that's on it is easier when you're using the specular workflow. Okay, so then whatever one you decide on, you can just pick that and export your textures. For this character, it's got 3 materials, so it'll export a texture set for each of your materials. Now, again, if you're, it all depends on how you split your model into pieces. If you have separate objects, I would actually highly recommend just importing each object separately and texturing it then. And then later on, what you can do is perhaps like this one has like a ground texture for the ambient occlusion of where it's standing. You can bake things like that in Blender for, you know, just to display better, because you don't off the bat just get ambient occlusion with all of your renderers. Talking about Unity, and I think we did try and build in ambient occlusion in this renderer, but I'm not sure if that still works, because that was a sort of a deprecated workflow. So I don't think it's there. I'll go check. And what I'd also like to do is, for those of you that are game students, I would actually like to get into the detail of like setting up the scene and setting up the renderer to suit your needs, and going and, you know, fiddling with the actual shaders so that you can have custom properties on your shader. Let me just see, projects, render pipeline asset. You also just see the camera on here. If that's the right camera, then it should have post-processing enabled, technically, but that does look like it freaked out there for a bit. Okay, I'm gonna have it enabled. Maybe not do that at runtime. Try that again. So if you're just taking this module as like a separate thing and you're not building assets for your main game project, then you don't really need to get into. I mean, we'll update this project on GitHub so that it works off the bat, and something like Sketchfab also makes it super easy. It's a very sort of self-explanatory process of uploading your models, but I'll show you how that works as well, and I think I have gone through that in the beginning. And you can test it. I think there's a limit to the amount of models that you can upload per month or something, or private ones. I'm not sure, so you don't want to upload or test this too often, but I don't know, you should do it at least once before uploading your final model. Oh, sorry, jumped into my mail there. I'll close those. Okay, cool. What has been working well, I think it's been cool to see what you guys are up to, and sort of treating each model as, you know, as it comes, and with whatever challenges it comes with. And I really like being part of the whole process and being able to help you along the way and fix things as they arise, rather than realizing at the end, once you've painted all your textures, that now something's not quite right and you have to redo everything. Like if you have to redo your UVs, you have to do redo your textures as well. So that's really not a nice place to be in. So please do continue to share your models with me and let me know if you get stuck on anything. I think tomorrow is a bit of a busy day for me, so I don't have any contact sessions open for today, and I haven't opened any for next week yet, but I will. And then yeah, like let me know how it goes, and even just send me a model over Discord or something. Cool. So that we were still busy texture packing stuff, but I think we've established that each shader and each process requires its own type of packing. If we simply go by what this shader requires from us now, so if it's in the specular workflow and we need to paste or get the specular map, we can actually see here as well whether it was a specular map or not by yeah, so it's an RGB in any case, so it can act as a specular map. If the channels are all the same, yeah, it says specular, or it says S, but it could have very well have been a metallic map. Yeah, so one way of seeing is whether that matches the outcome, and yeah, it sort of does. It's a little lighter maybe, but so it could be either one. I think it works fine for both, and there's nothing stopping you from sort of switching it out and seeing whatever workflow works best for you. So we still need to pack the roughness into the specular map. Your shader does also, in Unity at least, give you an option to switch this to albedo, meaning that's the base color. So whether you want to pack your roughness into the alpha channel of your base map, which could, I suppose, save you, like if you don't have transparency, that saves you another couple of channels, you know, like an extra extra alpha channel or something. I'm sure if you work it out that there's an advantage to doing that, but the more logical way of doing it would just be to pack it into the specular map. Then the specular and the roughness are grouped together in the base map with, if you have transparency or sometimes sometimes you want to use variations of that by accessing the tint, and then the tinting and the albedo alpha. I'm not sure if that's I'm not sure if it's even gonna impact it, but yeah. Anyway, it's not your first option. It's not the default. I wouldn't advise it. So let's grab these two. So they're targets at the moment. Okay. They're targets, but they don't have anything packed into their alpha channels, which means that they didn't really need to be targets. And targets, if you look at the amount of data they store and the file size, basically, the trade-off's quite heavy, because if you fill your entire mobile game with these 3 meg texture files, you're going to end up with a over 50 meg app real quick, which means that you're already limited to, I think, Wi-Fi downloads or something I think you can set it, but the point is that it's not that accessible anymore. So you want to reduce the footprint of your textures as well and optimize them as much as you can. So for color maps where you're not using any transparency, a JPEG would work best. And if you're doing something with transparency, a PNG would work well. But if you need to access the channel information, then you need to save it as something, as a targa, because that actually retains the channel info. I think you can I think you can also pack it into the alpha channel of the actual texture without making it a targa. So in this output preferences, it's still saving it as a PNG, but what you're going to get is a texture that is neither entirely your specular or your roughness map. It's going to where's this better example? Okay, here it's still it's combining it, and it's combining it into a PNG. The result here is going to be let's see if I go ahead and export this. Matte has a matte on its face. Okay. There's a Sketchfab preset there as well. Okay. Let's close a million apps quickly. Okay, so here we have specular smoothness baked into one, so it calls it that. Base specular smoothness. Okay. So that has, let's just open it in Photoshop. Because it has the the one map built into the alpha map of the other one, you can see how this is this is problematic. Like, we don't have specular, we don't, like, we sort of do. I mean, it's not blank, but how do you, like, how do you really work with something that's already in this state? So it's almost, it's better to unpack those and not have them built into the same thing. So in this case, we would actually go and say, you know what, I do need those textures to be packed, but I may need to use them in other applications as well. So for that matter, picking a more generic output template makes sense. So let's see, there's a PBR specular glossiness. Okay, so what this does is it packs your specular and your glossiness into two different textures. And then you can decide on how you want to pack it, because sometimes this isn't your final texture. Sometimes you need to go and tweak these textures, or you need to use this to extract additional textures from it. And you don't want it to be all packed on top of each other, because you can't use it then. So you can go PBR metallic roughness, which gives you two grayscale maps, or specular glossiness, which is the RGB and the grayscale versions. So if you pick those, I did it again. I don't mean to close that thing. Pick that, yeah. So instead of the Unity one, we'll pick the PBR specular glossiness. And there you can also see, actually, if you have been working in the metallic roughness workflow, you can have it converted from that, only in the texturing or the texture export process. So that's also quite handy to have, because sometimes, and I think most of you would, because by default, if you look at your shader over here, the shader that you're using for your texture painting is actually in metal roughness mode. So you can go switch it here, right? So you can go say, okay, well, I want a different shader. I want the PBR. Yes, this is a terrible view. I can't even read those. Let's see which one. It's here somewhere. There would be a PBR car, roughness, metallic. There, specular glass. So you can switch all the shaders out for specular glass if you want to. Right, and then it needs to do some recalculation. Or you may need to reapply your textures. Oh geez, no. What did I destroy? Okay, I found that that link that's sort of useless in any case, but I'd like to point it out because I like the developer, and I think if enough people bug him, then he might update it. It's not even the full character, and it's $75. It doesn't have any legs. What do you do with it? Okay, yeah. So this had some additional features, and there you can see that it goes back to his website again, but one of the sort of more hidden, because it's not, there's no link to it on the main page. So yeah, go contact this person and tell him to update this thing. Yeah, so it hasn't been updated for Blender 2.8, unfortunately, but it does have a couple of cool tools where it includes children, exports to Unity directly. It has model padding. You can set the paths. You can set the pivots, which is also cool. You can set each model's pivot automatically. You can automatically assign materials, or well, mesh modifiers is fairly easy to do. And there's a Unity editor script as well that you can. Yeah, so it was a cool. It was oh, this was very cool. So it paints or it bakes vertex. It bakes your ambient occlusion into your vertex colors, or it can do it by default. Now you can also go and generate a bunch of sort of vertex-based colors. We haven't really looked at vertex colors. It'll only work in Unity if you have a shader that can actually read vertex colors, but you can do some cool stuff with Blender's vertex painter. So even if you just do a quick dirty vertex, see, we just need to be in a tool that can actually read the dirty vertices. Alright, so it's doing something odd there. So that's how you could sort of, it's doing something weird in that case with those. There must be something odd about those vertices. Or maybe just not have enough of it. But what it essentially is then is some form of baked in ambient occlusion. Almost. If you wanted to use vertex colors, right? Okay, so like I said, it's doing some weird stuff in the middle there. Maybe because it's an object within an object. If I say dirt, it doesn't look so good. So the model then has, the moment that you do something like that, has vertex colors embedded in it, saved in it the same way that your UV maps are saved into the FBX. And certain applications, including Substance Painter, can read those vertex colors. So sometimes you can even go and deliberately paint as well. Not weight paint. Vertex paint. Right. right? So it'll do sort of these gradients. Ooh, I painted black. And yeah, tap into this information, because you can say, okay, this is where I want the dirt to collect, or I want, I want some discoloration in these areas. Just, it's dependent on topology, so you have to kind of, it's cool that you don't have to paint on your UVs, so you're not taking up any texture space or anything like that. But yeah, it's a little funny in the sense that you're painting the vertices. So there's some blur tools here as well, and that helps. Yeah, and then you can have this embedded information in your model that you can use in certain shaders. So in Unity you can use it, vertex colors. I don't think that you can use vertex colors for anything in Sketchfab. No, sorry, it's not sign up. Let me quickly check for you. So many accounts. Oh my, let me see. What? I can even drag a blend file in there. That's too easy. Do I have an FBX? No, I don't. Can I do a rigged blend file? Yeah, so I think there's a limit on whether it's public or private. Allow texture inspection. Those are the things that you're gonna have to switch on. And then your textures are already gonna have to be in the correct bagging process. Which reminds me, I think everyone should be back by now. So as we were saying, we were still exporting different textures. I think we did export this now again. No, did we switch it before we exported it? I think we did that. And then our textures went all wonky. So I'm not sure why it's not displaying the material anymore. Maybe that just needs to be reloaded, or maybe there's yeah. So yeah, ideally switch your shaders before you. Something's messed up now. Either switch your shaders before you start painting, so don't do that at a later stage. But like, if we undo a couple of times here, oof, nope. So switch back to PBR metallic. And it's odd that that texture doesn't want to read on the other surface, but okay. Either way, export textures. I'm going to use the standard PBR this time. Specular glossiness, and because we're using a metal metallic roughness workflow in Substance. I'm just going to convert it from that, and then say export. Alright, so essentially this is what you'll I think there might be 2 versions of this in there now. Let me do that one more time. Okay. So we've got these this is for every object. So for every object you're gonna have to do this. I mean for every material. So you're gonna have to submit a texture sheet per material, and you want to keep these materials either 1 per object, and rather not have multiples per object, because then you end up with a lot of textures that you need to lay out and explain. Trying to see base head. So we actually only want all the head ones now. You can make that a little bit easier to separate if you I think you can specify in the output template what those need to be called, and whether it's per mesh or per texture, and then you can take those tags away if you don't want it to be saved in that way. If you want to get, you can export, change the export preferences, or you can switch those 2 around, and then it'll be texture sets before head, or before mesh. Is it just mesh? Yeah, so let's just get rid of everything that's called base. It's kind of a little, and body. And then, again, essentially you'll have these textures that you can use. There's no metallic. There is no glossiness, and that's height. Specular is still gray. There is actually, if you look really closely, I don't know if I can just, like zoom in there, you can see that there is a little bit of a texture there. So that's then the glossiness. Okay. And what do we also have? Height, diffuse, normal. We don't have AO, or did we bake that into our... Let's see. Converted, diffuse, glossiness. It doesn't export ambient occlusion. Okay, so the standard glossiness or specular doesn't separate ambient occlusion for us. You can go and add extra maps, right? So if you drag, like, anything from here, if you want to bake it out eventually, you can tell it to export, or actually I think the easiest way is to duplicate one of these, change the name, and swap it out with what you want to export there. Hello. Yeah. What to grab from, it should be the gray channel from the ambient occlusion. And then it'll save out your ambient occlusion as well. So you can go and change these presets. Maybe a better idea would be to duplicate the preset first and then change it up. But hey, be adventurous and try things. Alright, so we're back here packing specular or roughness into the specular map. So in the channels, I'm going to grab the roughness, grab that layer, copy it, and pop it into the specular channel, which I then need to go and duplicate, and or the specular's alpha channel rather. So I need to go and create an alpha channel, put it in there, and what's nice about this process is that it's sort of it's non-intrusive. Like I can just switch that off. I can still have access to that color information, and it doesn't affect the way that any or either one of those textures actually look. So they're still very user friendly, or human friendly, and they still work in multiple applications and shaders. So this is sort of the safest way of doing it, just manually packing it into the alpha channel of a targa. It's already a targa, so I don't need to change it to something else. I'm just going to save it, but let me, while I'm here, just show you what the difference is. So it has a channel, and it supports the format needs to support channels. That's the main issue here. So if we go and look at something like a JPEG, then it'll give you this error saying that it's not supporting alpha channels, so your channel won't be included. Photoshop obviously supports it, and PNGs also doesn't support it. Remember, that's why the PNG ends up looking like, if you pack the specular and glossiness into the same material, you end up with something that looks like that. So we want to make sure that our format supports it. So if you carry on down the list, you can, someone's already gone through this process of checking every format and seeing which one works best. And generally, targas or TIFFs are preferred. The problem with a TIFF, even though it supports an alpha channel, is that it also supports layers. So then it may have additional color information that you don't need in your texture itself. So what I normally do is I keep a Photoshop copy of my textures at all time. I actually only have one texture, so I would call this like something like, especially this one over here. I think, no, where did I drag them all on top of each other? Because that's typically what I would have to work with. I think I deleted that one. That was the base color. Yes. So I would typically have something like this, and if I make a specular map from this color map, initially I would just sort of create a duplicate of it, make a folder, call that folder specular, and then pop that in there, and rather have folders for each. So base color, let's do this properly. You'd have that in a different section. You'll have in base color, you'll have that, and you'll have ambient occlusion in there, which in Photoshop you can already actually, well, if you want to see what it does, you can already switch this to multiply, and then that's baked ambient occlusion into your color map. Okay, so if you save out your color map and you don't have a slot for your ambient occlusion, obviously without the mask. Oh geez, no, I meant no. Like, don't apply it. The benefit that you have here is also sort of defining the intensity of your ambient occlusion map on your color map. So in some cases it's working. Sometimes this multiply process leaves it quite gray and dull. So you can tint your ambient occlusion if you want to. Only so slightly. Let's see, filter. I think it's under color, probably. geez, I don't even know where that is anymore. Oh, I'm on a grayscale map. Let me just see mode. That's fine. Why can't I tint it? Or, yeah, if you can't find the filter, pick a color, multiply that on top of it. Or overlay or something, or color. Not ideal. Just want to tint the. I suppose you can set the hue, etc. It's not a filter. Sorry, it's adjustment. Okay, well now I can't see it because I have that other tint on top of it. That's a bit rough. Maybe did it too much. But it does. So it doesn't look so dusty anymore. It's just a warmer ambient occlusion. It's a bit too warm, I'd say. But yeah, you could do that if you don't like that gray overlay. I think the standard lit shader does allow for ambient occlusion. So that's fine. You don't have to bake that down. But I think the main takeaway from this is like always have a master copy of your texture as a Photoshop document so that you can tweak things and extract additional materials and color information from this. And yeah, okay, so we still haven't finished packing this. Right, so everything's in place. Save as. Yeah, Photoshop for the master and Targa for your specular or metalness if you're packing the channel. Otherwise, for like I said, for flat textures, JPEGs, and for textures that need transparency, PNGs. Alright, so it says that already exists, so I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. And actually maybe I shouldn't have, but because now it's going to update. Oh, it didn't. Thank you. Save the copy. And let's just look at the. Where is the? There's no alpha. Can't actually see any difference, even though the one has a alpha channel packed into it, because it's not letting us preview the alpha. Which is okay, I guess. But let's go ahead and swap it out and see if we can see a difference then. Now which one's which? Okay, we have no difference whatsoever. Let's see what it saved it as. Please tell me it doesn't remember or recall the fact that the channel's not on. It might. So let's just see. It did cause a copy even though I told it to overwrite it. Let's just see what happens. Targa, save, replace. Oh, file name, copy tag already exists in this location. Yes. And reload. And is it on the actual model? Well, that was way less successful than I was hoping for. Why is it not taking the effect that it needs to? Okay. Where are we going to see the difference, really? Let me just figure out that first. Okay, so on the belt buckles and the boots and stuff like that. So that's where we should be seeing a difference. So it's really not doing it. Is it not importing the alpha channel? That is importing the alpha channel. Alpha is not transparent. Textures seem okay. So the more you can see, well, it obviously goes more glossy, but it's still meant to get that information from the packed surface, which it's not really getting it from, as far as I can tell. It's not really helping. Maybe it's just the nature of the actual texture. But for instance, let's see where the texture actually makes a difference. I switched it on. So that glossiness, it's only really supposed to affect those areas. And the rest is not supposed to be very glossy, so that's kind of the level of glossiness that you're going to need, because that's obviously adding too much to the rest of the model. So you're sort of catering for the lower level, and then that should be glossy because of the texture. But maybe I just can't tell. Look at it, maybe it is glossier than the other things. Maybe it's just the way it's been painted. Maybe we'll only really see it in action. And that's actually one thing that you need to keep in mind, is that sometimes, well, yeah, you can definitely see some areas are a little bit more glossy than others as it rotates. But a lot of these textures, especially textures that are based on your surrounding light or respond to your surrounding light, like your specular map and your normal map, you actually need lights in the scene. So in, or at least with Sketchfab, what you get is the ability to, ooh, shall we see what happened with this model, and which way it broke, because I'm pretty sure it's not ready for Sketchfab. So Sketchfab at least has some HDRIs that you can toggle through and you can see, and so does Blender, you know, to give you an indication of what it's going to look like. Let's just plug one of these textures in here and actually get a specular or metallic. All right, and then there's a roughness here somewhere. And then even these weren't, like, there were so many ways that you could potentially have exported this, or you know, if you've sourced this from somewhere, this could have been in any sort of format. So you really need to grasp like how these work together. So this looks quite flat now, even with all the textures into it. It feels like I'm missing the ambient occlusion. I do have an ambient occlusion map, but I don't have a slot for it. So in this case, I may want to just combine them. So I think you can just do a blend, or what is it called in Blender? Is it a merge? No. Sorry, I was in the wrong menu. Mix. It's not a shader per se, it's a texture. So it's a blend. Alright, mix RGB. Yeah, that would be it. And let's do a multiply. Cool, so you can see the ambient occlusion coming through. It really needs that ambient occlusion. Cool, it's quite a dusty piano. And see what a difference it makes in different environments. You can clearly see that it sort of responds and it behaves differently in different lighting conditions. And this is only where you start picking up, oh, okay, those things are a little shiny and those things. So you can see the little things like down here, those pedals are quite shiny. And it's because of, and I think there's these, yeah, those little nubs as well. So there's little detail in the texture that's making it behave like the material it's made from. The wood is generally not so specular, and the dust on top obviously not at all. Some of the keys, I don't know if they're that shiny. I think it was mainly just the metal parts. So with that in mind, if you're working with this this asset, I think we'll update it with an HDRI toggle as well, so that you can have a world environment or a studio environment. Because with the gray in the background, you really don't get to see what your specular maps are doing. Oof. Okay, so there were still some modeling items in this scene, so that's not great. Let's see, what do we have here? So there's your HDRIs you can choose from, and each of them affect the model differently. There are the materials that are added to this object, and again, this, you want to really optimize these and not have like a million of them in your scene, because you need to now go and select each one of them and then go and decide whether or not they're supposed to have displacement, normal map, subsurface, clear coat, opacity, emission, all sorts of things that you can go and set on that texture. Also, whether you're using roughness or glossiness workflow, metalness or specular workflow, and you'll see that those again require different maps from you. Yeah, so you don't want a million of these, because that ends up being a lot of work just connecting all the materials. Once you've connected all those materials, so you can go set colors for them, but you can also go to textures and then import textures. Your textures end up in a library at some point, and you can reuse them though. So if you do have multiple materials but you use the same texture set, that's already a bit of a time saver. And then there's post-processing, which makes everything look a lot better. Like that's your ambient occlusion. You can see that it's doing, so it has ambient occlusion that you can do at real time as well. And we also have the luxury of having post-processing in our scene, but I think this also needs to be updated, because it's not currently working. I'll need to fix that, but I'll update it. So if you're starting out with a clean scene, right? So if you're not, because this asset isn't really ready for you yet, and you can't upload like 100 million tests on Sketchfab either. You'd want to test it in a real-time engine at least, and I don't think, like Blender, sure, you can get away with combining your materials, and you can use the principal BSDF, and you can use Eevee to kind of preview what your real-time render looks like. But if you're doing it in Unity and you want to end up using this Unity asset, then the easiest way to do it now would be to just start a new project with that URP preset. So projects, new, universal render pipeline, and then this is your asset showcase, and then all the render settings and everything should be applied already, so you don't have to fiddle too much with this, but at least if we do go into the extra render settings and details in Unity, then you're already all set and ready to go. Essentially, it looks a lot like this scene, right? So it'll have your those Unity example assets in there, but you can switch those off. So I've switched off all the props and then just imported the model into the middle. I think I may have switched off some of the other things as well. There are already reflection probes and things like that in the scene, so gives you a nice little initial setup. Ooh, sorry, there's a Cine Machine camera in here, so I'm just going to switch that off so I can access my camera again. Ooh, is that not my main camera? That's whack. There's another camera. Okay. This scene though, okay, so this scene is the sample scene. Has directional light. It has universal render pipeline set up for you in your project settings already. It doesn't have, let me just see if it does have post-processing. Doesn't have post-processing on it. No, it must. There it is. Okay, so it's on a separate object, which is already has tone mapping on it, which you can go and change. It has some bloom, which is also cool, and a vignette. So this actually is a very good testing scene. Just go and switch off your those props, and then you can just import your model into the center here, and sort of reposition the camera for testing. Okay, now then at least it should have some reflectivity. If you look at, let's see, if we take that model, right, if we start with a new scene, then we want to create a new folder called models, and we're going to take the piano and all the textures and just drop it in here for now. Put the piano in the center. Okay, and already you can see there's some lighting issues. That is currently being set by your pipeline. Let's see. So you want to be able to up that a bit. I think should be able to in your settings. But yeah, I'll go through these proper. I'm just messing around now. Skybox, okay. That's actually what I want to show you, is how to add a custom skybox for your reflection. So basically the same thing that you have in here to test your reflectivity in your scene, because these gradients don't really work well, and neither does this flat grey color in the background. You can see a little bit of the reflections in here, right? So you can pick up the reflections of this gradient in his eyes, but that doesn't really look like reflections when it's only reflecting a gradient. Remember, it doesn't reflect the actual objects because it doesn't do ray tracing. It only reflects the image. So you actually, yeah, those lights need to be sorted out. It's got something to do with the distance of the light to rays, and the even switching to hard shadows should fix some of that. Ooh, it makes it worse. Pipeline settings, I can go and fix it quickly, but then I'm not gonna get to what I want to get to. So in the, yeah, like I said, I'll get to that later on. Let's see, what do we have here? Main light, per pixel, shadows, cascades. Just bump that resolution. And doesn't even need to be that high, actually. Ooh, okay, that does. Oh, but that's for the entire thing, and that's got something to do with the renders. It's not the renders. That's not good. All right, but that's sharper now at least. So it's better. But let's see, on the piano, if we go just do the piano real quick, we have our lit shader. Now remember, with your models that you import, you want to be able to manipulate those materials. So tell it to the materials that are assigned to your model. You want to be able to edit these, so make sure that when you import them that you actually extract the materials. It's going to ask you where to do that. There's a way that you can say to just do it the old-fashioned way and just make a folder inside your models folder, which is now weird because now you've got models, materials, models. That's okay for testing. This isn't our final scene. Otherwise you would have put them where they belonged, and you can go and specify that. But now we have at least editable materials. So now if I go back to my shader, you'll see that I can change everything about it. Then I want my base map in there, metallic map over there. Again, we have that roughness issue. Normal map. So I'll just quickly grab these two, see if this has yeah, you can see everything is shiny now. We only want it on the specular components, which is those. We did pack that. We have that in Photoshop, so I just need to save it out. Piano, not roughness. There's my piano master. Okay, so we've got base color, which is fine. We actually need roughness and specular. Oh goodness! Oh, I've blinded again. Would have been easier just to do this elsewhere. Like there. So same process, pasting our roughness into our specular map, going, saving this out as a targa. because it has layers. It doesn't have layers. Because the mode's grayscale. Okay, so let's make sure that that's not the case. Photoshop, save as. What the? What? My scratch disk is full. Okay, but I'm only running 3 Unities, a Blender, and 2 Substance apps, and Photoshop. Come on. Okay, but what we actually want to do is okay. Now nothing wants to do. Yeah, just don't save. Just quit. Just close. You're useless to me now. I'm not going to save that. Okay, so in here, just one last thing. If we want to change up this environment, you can go and create a material for your skybox. So or your background. So if you just go create material and you call this backdrop, and then you import an HDRI, right? So go to our textures. There's an environment here. So there's a studio environment, and then this sort of wallpaper thing that looks like in Starfield. So the studio looks like that. Don't know why it's so bright. You can tell it that it's a cube map, and then the way that it needs to map it out, and then you can apply that to your material for the background. So we have backdrop. Let me just see, what was that supposed to be? That's supposed to be a skybox. Let's just do backdrop sky. Yeah, skybox should do. Ouch. Give it a sky. There has to be more than one skybox setting. You don't want to manually add those. Cube map skybox. That's easier. And then take your HDRI that you generated, and then you can just drag that in there, and then that creates a sort of environment map for it, which you can then go and set the exposure of, and the rotation and things like that in the shader if you wanted to. But most importantly, if you go to the lighting settings of your project, you can go and swap out that skybox material. So that should give you something else to reflect, at least. I don't see much of a change, to be honest. And on the material itself, you should still be able to change the exposure. You can rotate it, obviously. So you should actually see the reflections update. I don't know if I can. But you can, maybe it's the shader that's on there. Okay, you can see it in the background, and it's meant to update specular stuff. I don't know what I did with the specularity of his eyes, so I need to go check that out. But that's how you get your own environments in there for testing the colors. You can see that it affects the environment. It may also be in your lighting settings, which isn't, it's also still trying to bake these things, so I'm rushing it a bit. And there are light probes, and then if you go closer, it should actually update. Alright guys, sorry, there was a lot of technical stuff. If you do need to refer back to it, I'll post the video on Classroom. But yeah, happy texturing. At least now you know what texture sheets are.